Your career is probably going to be rendered obsolete. Don't believe me? Stick around because we're going to break it down. Hey everybody, it's Brian from Life After Layoff, and today I want to talk to you about all things AI and job replacement, which is kind of the brave new world and what's emerging in the market right now. So in this video, I'm going to break down my thoughts on the emerging world of automation and specifically ChatGPT and how it might affect your career. But before we get too far into it, if you're interested in more career-related content just like this directly from a corporate recruiter, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You might also want to hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future content. So one of the things that's near and dear to my heart is the history of careers and how we've gotten where we are today and where we're headed in the future. So I've made some videos about my thoughts on the labor market. I actually dive a little bit more into the history of the labor market and how we got here. But I've also been thinking a lot about AI lately and how it could impact our careers. It really all comes from this software that's kind of been taking the world by storm, this ChatGPT. And unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard of it before. But basically what it is this software that using very few prompts can produce very lifelike or realistic content. Whether it's articles, essays, or a litany of other things, it has the potential to be massively disruptive, probably to the likes of which we haven't seen since the dawn of the internet era. And as we've learned the hard way over the last few years, companies are very worried about their bottom line, and in particular their labor costs. So this pendulum that swings back and forth, we've had wages that have skyrocketed over the last 18 months to 2 years. Now there's a little bit of a correction that's happening right now. And as we go forward, whenever there is a crisis that happens, and there's that saying that necessity is the mother of invention. And so as these companies scrambled over the last 18 months to keep up with this staggering inflation of wages and this bidding war that they had, in particular with software developers in the tech world, we've kind of talked a lot about that on this channel. But inevitably, if you're a business leader, you're going to be looking at ways to reduce your risk, reduce your costs. And what better way than to do it through AI? And we had this emerging technology that was introduced late last year, this ChatGPT, that has really disrupted things. It's really caused a lot of waves already in just its short amount of time on the market. Now, I will say, whatever we see in the public sphere, what they have behind the scenes is probably 30 to 40 years in advance of that. However, from a kind of a lay person's terms, what we're seeing coming out of the market now is this disruptive technology, which maybe should get some of us to have a little bit of pause on our career and say, could this affect me? And this video is not meant to be an alarmist video. It's really just kind of more to stoke the conversation of what I'm seeing in the market, what could potentially be coming. And certainly I'm not a futurist, but I do pay attention to this kind of stuff. But we should be aware as career-related people about trends in the marketplace and where we're heading. And especially if you're coming into the market, you're at entry level or you're trying to switch career paths, knowing what the market is going to be potentially doing can be a very big decision for you, right? You don't want to go study some degree program that's going to get outsourced and automated by the time you graduate. And the same thing goes for those of us who are trying to switch into different career paths. So I got thinking a little bit about how could this ChatGPT and AI kind of as a bigger extension of that, because that's just one segment of it, but as a bigger extension, how could that impact jobs and what kind of careers would be at risk? And the more I pondered on this, the more I kind of started having this epiphany that just about every job that I could think of could be impacted by AI at some point in the future. I'm not saying it's tomorrow or a month from now, but it could be. And as these companies are trying to react to these labor conditions, this labor market condition where they're trying to keep pace, and now there's these layoffs and the market's kind of shifting and there's some migrating going on and people are moving into different places, you have to think that a business leader is going to be thinking strategically. If they're the CEO of their business, they're thinking strategically about how do I reduce my risk? How do I reduce my cost? Because if I can reduce my cost, I can give more shareholder value back, which improves the stock price, which they're probably pretty big investors. They get gifted things like equity stakes, which are pretty significant and tied to their compensation. That's why they're so geeked up on that and really keyed into trying to keep that as tight as possible, because they get paid more directly. A lot of their, especially executive, a lot of their executive compensation package is tied to that. So you gotta think that they are thinking already about this. This question is now being asked in boardrooms of how can we leverage ChatGPT and other AI technologies to outsource potentially some talent. We, the employees, have to be really realistic about this and think, is the career path that I'm in at risk for being outsourced? And if you're somebody that's sitting there thinking this is pie in the sky sci-fi that's never going to come to fruition, I think you're being a little naive, because the reality is automation is coming, and it's coming quick. We're already seeing fast food restaurants that are introducing fully automated restaurants. We're seeing automated cars that are on our highways. We're seeing driverless trucks going down the highway. So this stuff is here. And it got me thinking about major career types and how this potentially could touch just about every job that's out there. Case in point, look at airline pilots. So we already have trucks driving down the road without any drivers in them. Airplanes are already fairly automated to begin with. Once a pilot gets the plane up into the air at a certain altitude, a certain point in the flight path or the flight plan, they switch over to autopilot, and the autopilot basically flies you to your destination, and they might re-engage it as they're doing their landing sequence. But the actual time that the pilot is actively flying the plane is a very, very small percentage. In fact, the plane probably could land itself if they trusted it enough. Me personally, I feel better about having a captain sitting in the seat, making sure that we're landing properly and making sure that everything goes well. And let's face it, a lot of traffic accidents and even aviation accidents are not due to mechanical failure. No, I mean, they are. There obviously is a lot, but a lot of them are due to human error. Would an AI crew make you feel better or not? I don't know how I feel about that one. But nonetheless, I could see that being the case, because pilots are paid a lot of money. Maybe they can get away with reducing, and I know the FAA has guidelines and all that kind of stuff. So that is one that I would not be surprised if it goes fully automated or nearly fully automated. Maybe they just keep one person in the cockpit, if that's even allowable. But think of the costs when airline pilots are at a major shortage right now, and they're also earning top dollar, $300,000 plus probably. You got to think airlines are looking long and hard at that, saying, how can we reduce our risk? Because they're at complete risk of if a pilot doesn't show up, the plane doesn't leave, even though in theory the plane probably could leave. Okay, so let's take another example. Let's think engineering. And I just was kind of randomly thinking of like, okay, a civil engineering project. Let's just say that there is a bridge that needs to be built. I could see a drone flying the length of where the bridge would go and mapping out the landscape and doing all of the calculations for how long the bridge needs to be, how wide it's going to be, doing all the surveying and all of that stuff. And then I could see those design, that data being fed back to an AI system like a ChatGPT, where that then does all the calculations for the bridge. It does the architecture work and basically sends off the plans to be built. Taking a step further, the construction of it. I could see there being automated machinery that goes in and actually builds it based on, it's like almost like a 3D printer. I mean, we already have that. And you could 3D print this bridge structure that's completely done through AI. And I don't think that that's that far off and that crazy of an idea that wouldn't be something that's being explored behind the scenes. Now you're potentially eliminating engineers, you're potentially eliminating architects, you're potentially eliminating construction crews and all the other support positions that go into building a bridge. And that's just one. Think of buildings, think of any engineering project. I mean, from manufacturing of products and services and ships and all that kind of stuff. I could just see it really kind of taking over all those industries in that regard. Let's take a look at accounting, because that's pretty low-hanging fruit, because what's pretty good at crunching numbers? AI and computers. And if you have the right inputs, they can take all the data that comes in, create your month-end reports pretty easy through an automated system, I would think, by a few commands and all this kind of stuff. And it could potentially render accounting work to be obsolete. This finance world could be very disrupted. Taking it a step further into trading, right now the markets are already run off microtransactions. I mean, by the time the markets open, all these trade, the rise and the fall of the stock prices and all that kind of stuff is all done through thousands and thousands, probably even millions of calculations and microtransactions, these trades that happen so fast that a human couldn't possibly do them and fulfill them. So it's already automated. So when you look at a ChatGPT type of software that can analyze market trends much faster than a human mind could, just the calculations, they could look for predicted trends and then place these orders and render a trader obsolete as well. And let's look at the medical field where it can be very disruptive. And I'm thinking specifically some very complicated surgeries, because they already have these machines, these surgical machines that are essentially run off of a very complex CNC program. So they type in what they want the laser to do, and it'll go in and make the surgical cuts. So I could see some advanced surgeries being replaced by an AI-driven machine. And that's a real futuristic question. Would you trust a machine to operate, do open heart surgery or brain surgery on you? I don't know if I would or not, because then it boils down to the same question as the airline pilot. Do you trust a human, or do you trust a robotic hand to make the right cut and to have the right contingency plan in case something doesn't go as planned? And the flip side, I could see there possibly being some value of having this AI be able to use lasers to maybe cut cancer out of you. I don't know. But in these futuristic sci-fi movies, that's what they all are. These med beds basically come in and you sit in it and it does this robotic thing, and it basically operates in the surgery on you, and all these doohickeys come down and doodads, and then they come out fully healed and ready to go. And sometimes I wonder if the movies that we see are predictive programming for us, predicting where the world is going to go. I don't know, something to think about. And I'm not above this, so let's talk about recruiters. I could easily see an AI taking over a recruiter's job. If you have a hiring manager who puts in their inputs for a intake call of some sort, their criteria, programs it into a ChatGPT type of software that then goes off and sources candidates based on these set of parameters, and then does a pre-screen, which would be pretty impersonal, but pre-screen nonetheless, and could deliver these relatively pre-screened candidates to a hiring manager. I could see there being a case for that being a disruptive technology in recruiting as well. And who knows, you could program it to not ghost any candidates anymore. So that would be great, although it probably would require an automated bugging of the hiring manager to give feedback in a more timely manner. But nonetheless, you could program it in so it automatically never forgets to give that feedback. So it could be a good thing, actually. Then I'm thinking legal functions as an extension of that, where you could potentially have ChatGPT software doing all this research work. It could go and scan and do all this really technical writing that is very analytically based and has to go through and reference a lot of very specific case study or court material. And when you look at the legwork that is required for these cases that these attorneys are going off and arguing, that could take a huge chunk off of their plate. Then that could probably be done much faster than a law clerk or even potentially a paralegal. And who knows, it might even make lawyers obsolete. And before you laugh at that, there was an article that came out recently that ChatGPT actually passed a law school's law exams and entrance exams to get in. So is that one really that far out? I don't know. Then there's writers and journalists. I think this one's a low-hanging fruit as well. And in fact, this is probably the one that was the most low-hanging fruit that I thought of, because you get instructed to write a pretty detailed research paper on something, and it does a pretty good job of it. And I've read that there are some newspapers who are now actually eliminating some of their writing staff and moving over to AI-driven content, which is an interesting and kind of weird way to approach your news. But the stuff that you might be reading online may have been written by automation or AI. Then there's also some pretty disruptive technology that's coming out in the graphic design space, where these AI programs are creating original artwork, which is very crazy. And if you haven't seen them before, do a search for it. It's pretty interesting, but it could make an entire group of jobs in graphic design completely obsolete as well. And potentially the scariest and maybe the most obvious one of all is the software engineering job. Think about it, a lot of software development teams have a principal engineer, then they have some mid-level or lower level engineers who do easier coding, and then you have some support roles that support it. But if you had that principal engineer basically creating the overall structure of the code, and instead of handing the coding work over to a lower level engineer, they send it through this ChatGPT to create the code, you're gonna be able to write clean code very quickly, much faster than a human would be able to do it. And let's face it, they can run around the clock. And if you don't think that companies like Amazon, which rely so heavily on software development and the expenses that are associated with that, I don't think they're looking at it very closely. I think you're being naive. And here's what's particularly scary about this one is, what happens when that software engineering AI starts to write its own code? It's like, at what point in time does this thing stop or become self-aware or start going rogue? And if you haven't seen the Netflix series Black Mirror, do yourself a favor and go and watch it, because it's pretty poignant. and it's pretty scary. And I don't try to be too negative about the future, because I think that there's hopefully a positive outcome years down the road. But you have to look at this from a very pragmatic perspective and say, look, where does this end? Because they're introducing all of these technologies, this AI, this automation, and all this stuff. And have we really thought this through as a society about how this will impact everything? What happens if AI comes and eliminates hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs, or eliminates an entire job classifications overnight? And suddenly all these people are scrambling for new career paths, and they have to completely reinvent themselves. And that's the things that I think about, is what would you do? And if you're in that situation. So I think over the next few years, we're going to see this thing start to evolve. You're going to start seeing more companies dabbling in this. And I don't think this is going to be an overnight thing where one day you're going to wake up and your job is going to be replaced by an AI. But I think as job seekers, as career-oriented people, we do have to act like our own CEOs, because those CEOs of these corporations are certainly doing it. They're looking at disruptive technology, disruptive things that can increase their shareholder value. We have to do the same thing in our careers, because we're the CEOs of our careers. So how are you going to address that potential threat? If you haven't done a SWOT analysis, or you're not familiar with what those are, the SWOT analysis is basically you're listing out your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. And to me, for a lot of us, a threat should be ChatGPT, even if it's not immediate. But don't be naive enough to think that it won't happen to you. 5 years from now, you might look back at the market and it be a very, very different thing. And the speed at which things are moving in today's labor market, we have to be prepared for it. Probably make a series of videos about what you should do in the event of this happening to you, or it looking like it's going to happen to you, and how you can protect yourself, or how you can pivot from one career type to another, and maybe even like where are some safe landing spots. But it is something that you should start to think about and get that dialogue going. And think about it in your own career type. How could your job be outsourced to AI, to ChatGPT, or some other disruptive technology that's along those same lines? Because right now, Microsoft is making huge investments in it. Google's making huge investments in it. This startup company that created the software is just one of many. There's lots of them that are coming out now. And it's like, I think you're just going to see a flood of them coming onto the market. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. So leave me a comment. I'm curious to see, do you think that your job is at risk, or would be at risk in, say, 5 years from now? And if so, what do you think are the safe jobs that are out there? And we'll maybe chat through those in a future video. But if you're somebody that's looking for a new opportunity and you're not really having much luck, that's actually something that I specialize in. A website called lifeafterlayoff.com. It's loaded with tips and tricks, all from an insider's perspective. And I'm going to give you my best and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses. The first one is called Resume Rocketfuel. And it is designed to teach you how to write a resume that's going to give you the best chance of getting noticed by those recruiters, ultimately to get that first round interview. And once you get that first round interview, and as of right now, it's still going to be a human looking at it, but we also want to make sure that we're prepared for the AI version. But once you get that first round interview, it's then up to you to sell yourself throughout the rest of the interviewing process. And that's where the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp comes in. It's going to walk you through each step, give you tools, techniques. It's really going to give you everything that you need to get through that interview process and then get you to that offer. I also teach you some offer negotiation skills so that we can most likely pay for the course and all that stuff through some good negotiations. And if you want to have the recruiter come and start finding you, or potentially even skip the recruiter altogether, you want to make sure that your LinkedIn game is on point. And that's where the Unlocking LinkedIn course comes in, because it's going to teach you how to set your profile up so that recruiters start to notice you, come to you. Because listen, it is way easier to get a job when a recruiter comes and finds you and solicits you than for you to try to convince a recruiter who is trying to sift through 600, 700, 800 applications. So if you can get the recruiter to find you, you're going to give yourself a huge advantage. And that's what that course teaches you how to do. It's also going to teach you how to unlock that hidden job market so that you can get access to some of these jobs that might not be readily available or readily advertised, and then how to get noticed for them. So really good course in that regard. If your LinkedIn game isn't really on point, I would highly encourage you to check that out. You can also find me on LinkedIn if you want somebody in your network. I'm happy to accept your friend request there. And I'm pleased to announce that I'm putting the final touches on a mini course that I'm really proud of, and I think it's going to be really beneficial. And it should be out by the time you hear this video, or maybe within the next week. I'm actually actively working on and trying to get all the final bells and whistles to it. So hopefully another week. But it is called the 48-hour interview crash course. designed to teach you how to ace an interview at the last minute. It gives you 48 hours to prepare for just about any interview. It gives you a lot of really deep, really good information about those specific interviews. And so if you're somebody that's freaking out about an interview that's coming up, check out this course. So I'll have a formal announcement when that's actually up. But as always, I'm going to keep my ears peeled for any developments in this AI world as it continues to morph. A little bit scared, not gonna lie. I'm not really quite sure how I feel about AI, but also very interesting nonetheless. And I'll be paying attention to this, and we'll get through this together, guys. And like always, I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you on the next one.